Yo, what's up guys? Dylan Bradshaw here. Check out my YouTube channel, Chromato Films. But anyways, today on Tips and Tricks Tuesday, we're going to be talking about how to use a DSLR camera properly. You don't see that. Alright, so today we're going to be using a Rebel T5i camera. For most Canons, it can work. This applies to all of them. But anyways, we're going to be going over the basics. So like shutter speed, ISO, frames per second, white balance, everything you need to know to use one of these babies to make a cool short film, whether it's on TV, on the big screen, or on Netflix for anything, you know what I mean? So let's go check it out. Alright everybody, we're going to start with our Tips and Tricks Tuesdays lesson. Today we're going to be learning about how to use a DSLR camera correctly when it comes to film. Now skills we're going to cover include aperture, ISO, frame rate, shutter speed, white balance, and we're going to touch on audio and lighting at the end, but these 5 skills are the 5 skills you need to know when it comes to making a film with a DSLR. However, there's a couple things that we need to cover before we move any further. There's a lot of settings on your DSLR, but there's really only 2 that you need to worry about, which are automatic and manual. If there's anything that you can't set on manual, make sure it's on manual. This gives you a lot more freedom when it comes to post-production and editing. Another tip I really highly recommend is that you go and change your auto power off setting to anything above 30 seconds to a minute. This will prevent your camera from turning off constantly during production, which can get in the way and become very annoying. Another tip I highly recommend is the rule of thirds, which many filmmakers, artists, and photographers like to use. This pretty much implies that the screen is split into 3 sections both vertically and horizontally, and the point of it is so that you can keep your subject of your image within where those lines cross. This just makes the scene a lot more interesting and visually appealing to the eyes, so I highly recommend this. Now on to our first basic skill for DSLR filmmaking, which is frames per second, which literally means the number of frames played in a second to create a video image. Now there's a couple settings on your DSLR. 24 frames per second is highly recommended by filmmakers for making films, and 60 frames per second is very smooth looking, but is used for slow motion video. There's also 30 frames per second, which most newscasters use, so I highly recommend 24 frames per second. The setting of your shutter speed, which is how much light your camera lets in, is also determined by your frames per second. You always want to make sure that your shutter speed is double the amount of your FPS. I'm using 24 frames per second, so right now I have my shutter speed at 50, because that's the closest it gets. As you can see here, the lower or more off the shutter speed is, the more distorted and motion blurred the picture is. The aperture of the camera pretty much works like the human eye does. If you're in a dark room, your eye tries to let in more light so you can see. And if you're in a bright room or area, your eye tries to let in less light so you can see better. So aperture depends on how bright or dark your environment is. Also, you can get a lot more depth of field with the wider your aperture is. And if you look closely, you can see the diameter of the camera's aperture change in order to let in different amounts of light. Image sensitivity, or ISO, is also a very important concept when it comes to filming high quality footage. The lower it is, the darker the image is, but the more quality it holds. And the higher it is, the more bright the image is, but the less quality it has. I recommend staying below 1600, because if you go any higher, then the image starts to look extremely grainy and has very, very low quality. So the lower, the better. As you can see here, the higher I make the ISO on the image, the brighter the image becomes and the more grainy. When it comes to white balance, most DSLR cameras have a really convenient white balance menu where you can customly choose the type of white balance you need based off the environment you're filming in. Choosing the correct white balance can make post-production, color grading, and color correction 1,000 times more easier, so make sure you white balance properly. Now that we've covered all the basics, let's get to some extra tips about filming with a DSLR camera. Using the proper lighting can make or break a cinematic shot. I personally recommend LED lights. Also, audio can be extremely important when it comes to filming scenes. I use a shotgun Rode video mic, which picks up any audio that the camera is facing in front of. I make sure that my sound recording is set on manual mode, just like every other setting on my camera. And I also make sure that the recording level is substantially low. Can I have my camera back? What's up guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to check out the links above if you want to see my channel, Grammato Films, or the channel that brought you this video, Flickr Film Society. Stay tuned for more and make sure to subscribe. Hello?